Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and while I'm recording this, we're definitely still waiting for election results here from this insane year, 2020. But in the context of drugs, addiction, and everything that I normally talk about, election night was a crazy, insane win that honestly I couldn't have even imagined a decade ago when I was writing about it on Psychology Today. And the reason is that a huge number of U.S. states actually decriminalized drugs in ways that we couldn't have thought of. So Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota have decriminalized recreational marijuana, means that you don't get arrested in those states anymore for weed. There are now a total of 15 states that have legalized marijuana, at least in its medical form, because Dakota, South Dakota, and Mississippi have done that as well. And then Oregon has decriminalized all illegal drugs, right? So for none of those are you going to get arrested. And Washington, D.C., decriminalized psychedelic plants, i.e. mushrooms, ayahuasca, etc., etc. I got to tell you guys, when I was writing about decriminalization of drugs over a decade ago, I really didn't think that we were going to get there this fast. I'm pretty excited that we have, but I want to start out by just some of the reasons why it's so crucial that we do this, and so crucial that we move away from this idea that you can arrest people for drugs. Now, I don't even necessarily believe in the disease model that all people who have an addiction are sick, but it's certainly true that keeping people arrested for drugs is not fixing the problem we're trying to fix. This whole thing started in the 1970s with Nixon, who kind of had this tough agenda around, we're going to arrest those terrible drug users. And in case it's not clear why that was happening, it was because of all those stoners and hippies that you've been seeing in all of those wartime, Vietnam movies, who were fighting his agenda. And so the idea was, hey, let's just get those people arrested. They're troublemakers. They're not Americans. We will put them away. Since then, less than every 25 seconds, somebody in the U.S. is arrested for drug possession. We are arresting over 1 million, almost 2 million people a year for drug possession, okay? For having a drug on you. By the way, you can't get arrested for using drugs because putting something in your body is not illegal. So you can get arrested for selling it or for possessing it or for doing something wrong while on it. Over 1 million people getting arrested every single year for possession. 1/5 or more of the people who are incarcerated are serving times for drug charge. And then another over 1 million people are on probation and or parole for drug-related offenses. Millions of Americans in this country right now are serving time because they use drugs. And there is zero evidence that putting people in jail for this will stop them from using drugs. In actuality, what it does is it creates such consequences for them that they end up living a life where using drugs or selling drugs becomes even more likely. I'll give you an example just from my life, right? Like when I got out of jail, 9 felony counts, and had to go on probation, I couldn't get hired. I'm a lucky mofo, right? Like my parents could pay my rent. I've said it before, and I will say it again, that if I didn't have their support, I would have had to go back to selling drugs because I couldn't get a job. When people get out of prison, when people get out of jail, life is so tough for them that it makes it almost impossible to support what they need for their own needs and their family, etc. So people put themselves under risk. They go back to using if they were using in the first place. They go back to dealing to make money, etc., etc. And unfortunately, as we know, because of the world, the racial disparity world that we live in right now, this affects Black, and brown Americans at a much, much greater rate. Like, even though black Americans are only about 10% or 11, 12% of the population, they're just over a third of the drug-related arrests. That means they're getting arrested at almost 3 times the rate that is justified by their presence in our population. And when you look at who's actually in prison and jail, 65 to 70% of the people in U.S. prison populations are actively addicted. And 20% more were under the influence of a drug or alcohol when they committed the crime that got them in there. So here's the thing. When you've got 80% of people in your populations that are using drugs, putting them in jail doesn't make it less likely that they'll get arrested again, but instead actually makes it more likely that they will go back to using and or selling drugs later. Whatever that method is that you used has failed. It just failed. And there's no way to get around the fact that we've spent trillions of dollars, not billions, trillions of dollars trying to fix this problem by arresting people, and it's done nothing. It's done nothing. So I applaud all the states that are doing this. I'm so happy that we're moving to a place where we can at least have this conversation. And when I posted about this, a lot of people said, well, don't you think people are going to be using a lot more drugs, et cetera? I mean, maybe, but not as much as you think. I don't know anybody who's like, hey, I've really wanted to try some heroin, but I'm not trying it because it's illegal. Actually, and this is a theory of mine that will get meted out here over the next few years as we do this experiment. Historically, if you needed to get weed, you had to go to a drug dealer. Drug dealers sell other drugs in addition to weed, so you would be exposed to drugs that you wouldn't have access to in any other way. If you can get weed from your local dispensary, they're probably not selling heroin, coke, meth, etc. And so those drugs are not in your wheelhouse. They're not being introduced to you, and you are actually less likely to do them. But the important thing is, as we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars per state in some cases, right? Like Oregon itself is suggesting that they are saving about $100 million a year by saving themselves on police costs and incarceration costs. You can actually take all that money and put it into the things that have been shown to help those people. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road here. Not everybody who possesses drugs needs to stop using drugs. Pause, rewind that again, and listen to it. Not everybody who uses drugs needs to stop using drugs. What do I mean by that? Sophie smokes weed every once in a while, maybe once a week. Sometimes it's twice a week. Sometimes it's once every 2 weeks. If she got caught, I mean, it's legal now in California, but if she got caught with weed and got arrested for it, that is a very different situation than somebody who is smoking weed all day, every day. And here's the thing, even somebody who does smoke weed all day, every day doesn't necessarily have consequences from it. So going to jail is just not the appropriate thing. Here's when you should go to jail if you're a drug user. You broke another law while using drugs. I'm sorry, guys, but I don't think being high excuses you from being able to steal because, well, I was high, I didn't really know what I was doing, or being drunk or in a blackout. You still have to stand for the consequences of the things you do while under the influence of these substances. But being under the influence alone should not qualify you for an arrest. And if these states can now have an extra $50, $100 million available for treatment, they could do so much good to actually help the people who are really struggling. Let the person who is just smoking some weed go home and enjoy themselves, and take the person who's addicted to weed, or the person who's addicted to pills, or the person who's addicted to heroin or coke or meth. Let them get help. Now, the way that's going to work in this context is those people are going to be more likely to get caught repeatedly. They have fines, and they do get introduced, like in the Portuguese model, to a health coalition, a panel that can help them sort better what's going on with them. Does that mandate that they'll get help? No, it doesn't mandate that they will get help. But again, as I just mentioned, spending all that freaking money on them while they're in jail or in prison also doesn't mandate that they get help. And so if the only thing you're saving us from is that person's using pattern, I don't really care all that much, right? Give them the agency. And then, like I said, provide them the support, the help that they need to actually do better. Because here's the thing that we've introduced into our society when we said all these drugs are illegal. What we said is we think these things are bad. And because we think that they're bad, you're not allowed to do them. And somehow in this crazy, crazy understanding of humanity that we have in this America, and this puritanical understanding, we thought that because we told people that these drugs are bad and that they shouldn't do them, that people wouldn't do them. I don't know if you have kids or not. If you don't, there's a news flash. Telling somebody not to do something does not make them not do it. Here's what it does do. It makes sure that if they do it, they won't tell you about it. So all it does is it creates a black market for what it is that you don't want people to do. You have to look no further than Prohibition, right? Everybody was drinking. We decided that drinking is a bad idea. We passed an amendment. Alcohol became illegal. Drinking rates did go down a little bit. They did, because some people decided, hey, I'm not allowed to drink anymore. It's against the law. The vast majority of drinkers just started drinking underground in these speakeasies and bootlegged alcohol, etc. And what else happened? Cannabis use went up 40%. Why did it go up 40%, people? Because individuals needed to change the way they feel. Alcohol was no longer legal, so they went to weed. Weed was legal at the time until it wasn't within a decade or so, because now they decided that weed was also bad for you. So by the 1940s, that started becoming a thing. And now we've been playing whack-a-mole in that way forever and ever. I'm so proud of Oregon for stopping that fucking tail chase. You cannot legislate people's feelings. You can't. You can try it. You can do whatever you want with it. It's not going to look good in the end. What it's going to look like is 2 million people either in jail or on parole because they smoked some weed or did some blow or popped some pills they weren't supposed to or did some heroin. The people who are actually having problems with these things, they need help. Jail and prison is not help. People go to change their feelings and the way that they relate to the world all the time. Movies, music, festivals, and drugs all serve that purpose. And if we're going to start making everything that people use to make themselves feel better illegal, first of all, we better create a society that supports them feeling well on a much, much deeper level, which we don't right now. And secondly, we will end up with millions of people in prisons, which is where we've ended up. So I'm incredibly, incredibly proud of the states that did this. I'm really hoping that this also helps that racial disparity greatly reduce itself, because if you have less people that are black and brown in jails and prisons, less people getting arrested for that, that means the records will not affect their employment opportunities. They will have a better chance to support themselves and their community, and therefore create a much, much healthier population in general for all of us. I'm so happy that this happened. Like I said, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have predicted that within a decade it would have happened. I would have thought it'd take longer. I'm hoping this starts trickling down to a federal reality. And yes, of course, this is an experiment. Some people are really, really scared that we're going to see heroin use all over the streets in all these towns and cities. Newsflash for you, in some places you go to, in these places, it's already happening. I can't wait to see what happens when we give people some more agency. But, and this is a big but, this hinges on the idea that we will actually start providing these people with actionable help that they can access and reach and afford and take advantage of, that they want to employ in their life. So that means that for Oregon, DC, and some of these states, we're going to have to start getting real about what sort of help the people who struggle with addiction need. Newsflash, quitting is not the help that they need. They need help with resources and the way that they feel about themselves and the life that they live, et cetera, et cetera. I am really, really hopeful that we've just started moving on that path, and I can't wait to see what happens in Oregon and DC. Colorado's already done some of this, and so has California. So really excited to see this. If you're in one of those states, do me a favor, screenshot this, share how you contributed or how you feel about this happening in your own state. I want to hear more from you, and maybe even after the new year rolls out and these things take effect, how is this actually impacting you? Because that's what really matters in the end. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming along on this ride with me of an entirely different way of thinking about drugs and alcohol. Yes, even from somebody who is working with people who are addicted. And I look forward to these changes in our society. All the best to you. Have an amazing weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful, and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you. So please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com. if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating.
Thanks, and see you next week.